This is Al Pessin, VOA News in Kyiv. I'm here with U.S. Ambassador Geoffrey Pyatt. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us on The Voice of America. I have to ask you first about the fighting in the East. Is it directed by Russia? Has it taken on a life of its own? And is the Ukrainian military and security forces up to the challenge?
Well, the bottom line is we don't know. We're obviously very concerned about this violence. There's extensive evidence that these groups are coming from across the Russian border. Personally, I'm skeptical that this could be happening without some kind of official, at least connivance. Very worried about the escalation in separatist military tactics over the past week or so. The violence, the terrible violence yesterday in Donetsk, and I was very sorry to see, I think, at least 2 civilian casualties, seems to have begun when the separatist groups tried to seize control of the Donetsk airport. There was extensive evidence on social media of heavy weapons use, and clearly, as the government has said, and as President-elect Poroshenko has said, it seems these groups are interested in sowing chaos, and that's something that we condemn unequivocally.
Sunday's election got very high marks from international observers and from Ukrainian observers as well. But does it lose any legitimacy because so many voters in the East were not able to vote?
Not at all. The first thing I would say is that this election was a huge victory for the Ukrainian people. I was struck in my own visits to polling places, as I'm sure you were, by the outpouring of patriotism, by the enthusiasm that Ukrainians demonstrated for their own democracy and the opportunity to express their free will. That was clearly the case throughout the country, as documented both by the many, many international observers as well as the Ukrainian civil society observation groups. And I would highlight in particular the very positive role played by domestic civil society groups in seeing that this was a free and fair election and an election that genuinely reflected the will of the Ukrainian people. Unfortunately, as you note, in Donetsk and Luhansk, because of the actions of these violent separatist groups, there were voters who were denied the franchise, who were denied the opportunity to cast their vote. But even in those 2 oblasts, you had 15% recorded participation. I was impressed to see the courage demonstrated by the election officers who came to their polling places, even in the face of these threats of violence. The groups, in several cases where these separatist groups went into polling places, seized polling materials, burned ballots, smashed voting urns. But on balance, we see this as perhaps the freest election in Ukraine's history in terms of the breadth of candidates, the quality of the administrative arrangements, the documented freedom of the press. This was a positive election for Ukraine and for the Ukrainian people.
I know you're acquainted with President-elect Poroshenko. What kind of president do you think he'll make? What will his top priorities be, and what should they be?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. First, I mean, the most important thing about Mr. Poroshenko is he was chosen by the Ukrainian people. I've said before this election that for me, the most important objective was not the individual chosen, but the fact that it was through a process which was viewed by the Ukrainian people as credible, as reflective of their will. And clearly, as President-elect Poroshenko himself said on election night, he received an unambiguous mandate from his citizens. He has identified priorities that we would agree with. His first priority on restoring stability and security in the East, reaching out to the East. It's a very good thing that he indicated that his first trip will be to the east, to Donetsk, and to engage the people of eastern Ukraine in the process of building a sustainable and healthy democracy. He has said that he will also place a high priority on issues of anti-corruption Again, a theme that Vice President Biden emphasized very strongly in his public remarks when he was here. And I am impressed that the President-elect Poroshenko has identified this issue, which in all of the polling data, the Ukrainian people are deeply concerned about. So this is an opportunity to change the bad habits of the past, to build a democracy, to build a government that serves the interests of the people, not the interests of those at the top of the government. And third, we strongly welcome his priority on accelerating Ukraine's European choice, deepening Ukraine's institutional relationship with Europe, opening channels for trade and people-to-people ties with Europe. We see this as a way to build prosperity for Ukrainian citizens, as a way to build stability for Ukrainian institutions, and as a way to build a more just and democratic society in this country.
Do you see Ukraine eventually joining the European Union and perhaps even NATO?
Well, I think those are decisions for the Ukrainian people, first and foremost, and then also, of course, for the institutions concerned. We understand, including from my conversations with my very impressive EU counterpart, Ambassador Tymbinski, that Brussels wants to move quickly with the implementation of the full EU association agreement, the document which President Yanukovych backed away from in November, setting this crisis in motion. We obviously strongly welcome that. I've also heard from my EU counterparts a very positive reaction to President-elect Poroshenko's idea of pursuing visa-free access to the Schengen zone. Again, a step to build people-to-people ties, and I think also very useful as a way to attack this information war, which Russia has waged so actively, especially in eastern Ukraine, suggesting that European values will be a threat to Ukrainian values, that somehow the model of democracy and economic prosperity that Europe represents is a threat to Ukraine. Nothing could be farther than the truth, and I think one of the best ways to attack that lie is by allowing more Ukrainians themselves to visit Poland, to see what's happened next door.
Ukraine is looking to the West for aid, economic aid and military aid. Do you believe the United States will come through with the kind of aid that Ukraine needs?
Well, a couple things. First, we are strongly committed to supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity, to helping this Ukrainian government build a modern, economically prosperous democracy. Congress has supported a $1 billion loan guarantee, which has already gone to market. Those funds are being brought to benefit the Ukrainian economy. We have increased our development assistance here, and I expect we will continue to do so in the months ahead. On the military side, Vice President Biden announced when he was here that we have brought our overall defense and security assistance package up to about $20 million. This is non-lethal assistance, which is going to both the Ukrainian Army, but also to the State Border Guard Service to enhance the ability of Ukrainian authorities to protect their frontiers, to stop this subversion coming from Russia. We're going to continue with that work. We have a long-standing defense and security cooperative relationship here. I expect that to continue and deepen in the years ahead.
With all the procedures in Washington for providing aid, can the United States provide aid quickly enough, especially military aid, so that Russian-backed forces cannot, for example, monitor the radio communications of the Ukrainian forces?
Well, I'll say two things. First of all, on the economic side, and I'm convinced the most important assistance that the United States will provide here is our assistance to make Ukraine an economically strong, economically healthy society. That's the best answer to Russian aggression. And the assistance that Congress has provided through this loan guarantee moved at a record pace. So everybody is working on all cylinders at this point. On the defense and security assistance side, we are working through different channels to move things as fast as we possibly can. One of the categories of goods which we are going to deliver is additional radios to help address some of these issues in terms of command and control, communications, the ability of the Ukrainian military to adapt to a changed security environment. But this is going to be a long-term task.
The United States was very supportive of the democracy movement here in Ukraine, and you yourself were very supportive and went down to the square several times. Do you have any regrets in view of everything that's happened since then about what U.S. policy was and how it was conducted? Do you think maybe some things could have been done differently that might have avoided all of these unintended consequences?
No, well, I'll say a couple of things. First and foremost, this extraordinary 6-month period, the most dramatic 6-month period in the history of independent Ukraine, has been the accomplishment of the Ukrainian people. And the suggestion that you somehow, that you see sometimes in Russian media that somehow the United States was behind this process is ludicrous. It misunderstands the courage of the Ukrainian people, the resolve of the Ukrainian people, which I think is so apparent to all of us who lived through that period. Our role has been as supporters of the aspirations of the Ukrainian people for a more democratic future. We have worked throughout this crisis from the very beginning to avert violence, to encourage dialogue, to encourage democratic solutions. As I said at the very beginning, for me, that's the most important message of this election, coming at the end of this extraordinary half year. An election that was a victory for the Ukrainian people. I think, if I have one regret, it is that I haven't had enough time myself to reflect on the extraordinary drama of this period in order to capture the sort of moral dimension of it. And I think sometimes in the Washington conversations, people are so captivated by the larger geopolitical story that they miss the most important aspect of this, that this was a revolution of dignity, that this was about the Ukrainian people themselves standing up to demand a more moral, a more just society.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us on The Voice of America.
Great to talk to you.